The church commissioners are the inheritors of a large endowment. In fact, the endowment almost certainly goes back to Anglo-Saxon times, when rich aristocrats and kings gave land to the church so that the clergy would pray for their souls. And this endowment was handed down through the generations. It narrowly avoided being taken away by Henry VIII when he took the land from the monasteries, but a lot survived. And in the 19th century it was put together in a single fund, and the church commissioners are the inheritors of that. Of course, they've sold a lot of the land and bought securities instead, but essentially it's an old endowment. Well, first of all, we have to manage it as well as we can, and we set very, very tough objectives, which is to exceed inflation by 5 percentage points, which is a demanding target. And the 5 percentage points are, if you like, wealth. If you only match inflation, you're standing still. So you've got to do better than that. And we've done that on average for 20 years now. And then secondly, we have to decide how to distribute it sensibly. Some of this is given to us. We can't decide. First of all, there's a pension scheme, an old pension scheme, closed in 1998, but it's still paying out over £100 million a year. Secondly, we have some statutory duties, things we have to do. Pay the stipends of bishops and deans and residentiary canons and so on. All those things we have to do. Then what's left we distribute through the Archbishops' Council to the diocese to help them with their costs. Well, the task groups programmes which they're recommending will require more funding than we normally put out. Indeed, our rule is that we will only distribute as much as is realistic in terms of preserving the value of the endowment through time, so that future church members have just the same resource in their terms, their money terms, as we do today. That's the golden rule, if you like, but the important thing is that the financing the task group's recommendations will take us beyond that rule. And we would have to, in the rather frightening word, over-distribute. And there's a lot of fear. I share the fear about over-distributing, because it can be a way, if it's done badly, you waste the money, you've shrunk the endowment and nothing to show for it. This had a bad history in the 70s and 80s when the commissioners did over-distribute, and they did so without really knowing they were doing it. And they did so in a way which didn't bring any great reward to the church, and so it became a disaster. And frankly, the commissioners didn't quite go bust in the very early 90s, but they ran out of funds and had to be reconstituted. And it was a terrible disaster. And people know that, they remember it, they remember these things for a long time. So the paper is designed to show people this is exactly what happened. No punches have been pulled. I tell the whole story, the bad bits, of which there are many, as well as the good. The church goes on declining, shrinks. Because you see, the mechanism is simple if terrifying. The church has got older. The average age is approaching 70, I believe. And these people die off. But you have to have the same number of younger people joining just to keep level, let alone grow. If you're to grow, you have to have more younger people joining. And that's the missing bit at the moment. Something has to happen. It can happen because there are lots of tools at the church's disposal. The church has already learnt to use social media well. There are very successful experiments such as Messy Church and so on, which try to meet people where they are rather than saying you must come into great big daunting buildings to be church. So the church is good at experimentation. Other things it's not good at, but that it's good at, and that's worth backing. Well, I hope, first of all, they will think very carefully about the principle. Is this such a crisis for the church that we should break our rule and over-distribute? That's the first question. Secondly, if we do, how can we do so safely? And I want synod members in the debate, and however else they wish to communicate, I want them to tell me from their own experience in their own business lives or charity lives or other lives, running schools, whatever it may be, tell me how, in your experience, it's best to control this big burst of expenditure so it's well spent. So the questions I hope that Synod will dwell upon will be, how do we best make sure the money is spent wisely? It's not enough just to have the plans and ask us. We have to ask some questions back. What is the evidence? Are they evidence-based? What is the timetable? What are the checks? Is it enough to do the job? I don't want people to come and ask us to finance things in a half-baked fashion. All these questions we will have to look at, otherwise we won't put the money out.